Hello and welcome to this edition of Back in History. In Back in History, we take you down memory lane with a view to refreshing your minds on the events that took place in the historical past. In this edition, we narrate the story of all the military coups that have taken place in Nigeria from 1966 to the last coup that was staged by General Sani Abacha in 1994. We appreciate you for always keeping us company on this channel, even as we encourage you to click the subscription button and also share videos with friends and loved ones from time to time. The first recorded history of the arrival of British colonial officers in Lagos, Nigeria was in 1861, the year of the annexation of Lagos. From then, Britain extended their colonial rule to other parts of Nigeria until 1960, when independence was eventually granted. In essence, Britain had colonized Nigeria for well above 100 years. Nigeria gained independence on October 1st, 1960, with Sir Abubakar Tafawa Balewa emerging as the Prime Minister of the new country, and Dr. Nnamdi Azikiwe emerging as the President, and many other distinguished personalities emerging either as ministers or members of Parliament. The country at independence had 3 regions headed by premiers. A 4th region, the Midwestern region, was later created. The regions were equivalent to what we have today as states of the Federation, and the present-day governors are like the premiers of that time. The country went on smoothly, and it was intended that it will continue uninterrupted for many more years and even forever. But that hope was soon going to be dashed. There was a military coup in the horizon, and the coup was to be executed as soon as the coast was clear, and the coup was going to be bloody. On the night of January 15, 1966, barely 5 years after independence, the first military coup was executed in Nigeria. It was planned and executed by young military majors of the Nigerian army. The majors divided themselves into strategic groups in the 4 regions of the country, and each group was given a specific target to carry out. The targets included the elimination of the very important personalities in the country, civilians and military, and the seizure of critical state institutions and instruments of power. The names of the majors were Major Chukwuma Kaduna Nzeugwu, Major Emmanuel Ifeajuna, Major Christian Anuforo, Major Timothy Onwatuegu, Major Donatus Okafor, Major Humphrey Chukwuka, and Major Adewole Ademoyega. These majors worked in partnership with other soldiers below them in military ranking and perfected their plans to execute the coup and bring to an end Nigeria's first republic. The majors were revolutionary minds in the Nigerian army. Their intention was to rid the country of the ruling class, which the young officers described as corrupt. In the dead of the night of January 15, 1966, the coup plotters struck simultaneously at the capital cities of the regions and at Nigeria's then national headquarters, Lagos. The northern flank was led by Major Chukwuma Kaduna Nzeugwu. He led other personnel of the army and broke into the residence of the premier of the region, Sir Ahmadu Bello. He met the premier with one of his wives. The premier was instantly eliminated. So also was the wife of the premier, who bore the name Hafsatu. The personal secretary of the premier was also killed. So also was the driver to the premier. Others were also killed in the raid of the premier's residence. The coup in the northern region, as led by Major Chukwuma Kaduna Nzeugwu, was indeed a bloody coup with scores of lives lost in few minutes. At the Lagos flank, the coup was led by Major Emmanuel Ifeajuna and Major Chris Onufuru, and supported by others. Here, the Prime Minister of the country, Sir Abubakar Tafawa Balewa, was killed. Also killed in Lagos was the Minister of Finance, Festus Okotie-Eboh, Lieutenant Colonel Kor Mohammed, Lieutenant Colonel Ato Unebu, Lieutenant Colonel Pam, Brigadier Mai Malari, and several other officers and civilians. The Lagos operation was also very bloody, with scores of lives lost. In Ibadan, which served as the capital of the Western region at the time, the coup plotters shot and killed the premier of the region, Chief Samuel Ladoke Akintola. As noted earlier, there were 4 regions and 4 premiers at the time of the coup. 2 of the premiers were killed, namely Sir Ahmadu Bello, Premier of the Northern Region, and Chief Ladoke Akintola, Premier of the Western Region. Dennis Osadebe, Premier of the Midwestern Region, and Dr. Michael Okpara, Premier of the Eastern Region, were not killed. So much had happened in just one day, and Nigeria was not going to be the same again. The innocence of the 5-year-old independent country had been stained with blood, and the first coup was to give birth to a series of coups in the country. The second military coup occurred in July 1966, barely 6 months after the first military coup. The coup was equally bloody. The head of state at the time, General Aguiyi Ironsi, was killed, and power was taken over by another military ruler, Lieutenant Colonel Yakubu Gowon. What happened was that the first military coup was aborted by loyal troops, and the executors of the coup were arrested and detained. They were unable to take over the reins of power as was planned by them. The coup having failed, the most senior military officer in the country was called upon to take over the reins of power and restore order to the country. That most senior officer was General Aguiyi Ironsi. Upon taking over, Ironsi immediately understood that the mood of the country was not good. There was serious distrust following the killings that took place in the first coup, and the country was sharply divided on ethnic and tribal lines. Ironsi, then took a decision to go round to the country and meet with traditional rulers, politicians, opinion leaders, and various unions, and dialogue with them with a view to moving the country forward. This is what took him to the western region of the country, whose capital was in Ibadan. Ironsi left Lagos and headed to Ibadan for the meeting. After the meeting, he slept over at the residence of the military governor of the region, Colonel Adekunle Fajuyi. While in Fajuyi's residence, a group of junior officers and men, led by then Captain T.Y. Danjuma, marched into the residence with guns and grenades and ordered the head of state to surrender himself to them. Ironsi did as was commanded and followed them. Governor Fajuyi pleaded with them to no avail. The coup plotters also took Governor Fajuyi along with them. These 2 leaders were driven in a Land Rover Jeep to a place known as Lalukpon in the remote part of Ibadan. There in Lalukpon, the 2 leaders and senior military officers were ordered to come down from the vehicle. They were moved into the bush and shot repeatedly. They died on the spot and were buried in shallow graves. This marked the end of the government of General Aguiyi Ironsi. He was an Igbo man from present-day Abia State. Nigeria was left without a leader for about 2 days until a young Christian military officer from Plateau State, Lieutenant Colonel Yakubu Gowon, was installed as the new military head of state. Gowon governed Nigeria from August 1st, 1966 down to 29th July 1975, when a coup was executed against his government. Gowon was in faraway Kampala in Uganda attending the conference of the Organization of African Unity when the announcement was made by his head of Presidential Guard, Lieutenant Colonel Joseph Garba, that Gowon had been overthrown in a palace coup and that General Murtala Mohammed was the new military head of state of Nigeria. Gowon was warned not to return to the country. The coup against Gowon was thus the 3rd military coup in Nigeria's history. Murtala Mohammed then began his administration in earnest. He had Olusegun Obasanjo as his deputy. Obasanjo was his senior in the army, but he was persuaded to accept to deputize Murtala for a number of reasons. Obasanjo accepted and the government went on smoothly. Barely 200 days into his administration, Murtala was shot at a traffic jam in Lagos on his way to work and killed on the spot. He was shot by a group of soldiers led by Lieutenant Colonel Bokasuka Dimka. This was the fourth military coup in Nigeria. Following the killing, Dimka went to Radio Nigeria and began to make announcements to the country, but he was soon dislodged by then Colonel Ibrahim Badamasi Babangida, who went to the radio station with his troops, and the coup was truncated. Dimka did not take over the reins of government. He ran away. Murtala's deputy Olusegun Obasanjo thus continued in office. He succeeded his boss and appointed a senior military officer from the north, Shehu Musa Yaradua, as his deputy head of state. Obasanjo governed till 1979 and saw to the conduct of democratic election and handed over power to Alhaji Shehu Shagari, who was sworn in as the civilian president of Nigeria, with Dr. Alex Ekwueme sworn in as vice president. Shagari was in power from 1979 to 1982 when he served out his first 4-year term. He contested for a second term and won. On 31st December 1983, Shagari was removed in yet another military coup in Nigeria. He was arrested and kept under house arrest, while his vice, Dr. Alex Ekwueme, was arrested and locked up in prison custody. A new military head of state was announced, and his name was Major General Muhammadu Buhari. This coup returned Nigeria to full military rule once again, and the coup was the fifth military coup within the short period of Nigeria's independence. Buhari went on with his government oblivious that a coup will soon be executed against him. On 27 August 1985, Buhari was removed from office in yet another military coup plotted and executed by Ibrahim Badamasi Babangida, Sani Abacha, Joshua Dogonyaro, David Mark, Sambo Dasuki, and many other military officers. Buhari was kept under house arrest. His deputy Tunde Idiabon was also arrested and kept under house arrest. A new government was formed with General Ibrahim Badamasi Babangida from present-day Niger State emerging as the new head of state of Nigeria. The coup that brought Babangida to power thus marked the sixth military coup in Nigeria. It was indeed a harvest of coups in the country. Babangida went on with his administration and had two deputies, namely Commodore Ibitu Ukiwe, who served from 1985 to 1986, and Augustus Aikomo, who served with him from 1986 to 1993. Babangida ruled for an unbroken period of 8 years, namely from 1985 to August 1993. During these 8 years, Babangida survived a number of attempts to remove him from power. These plans were leaked and thwarted. But in April 1990, Major Gideon Oka, a thief man from Benue State, led a litany of armed soldiers to invade the seat of power at the time, which was Dodan Barracks, with a view to removing Babangida from office. He almost succeeded in the coup. Babangida's residence was captured, and Babangida almost lost his life but for the smart maneuvering of his ADC, Lieutenant Colonel UK Bello, who was quick enough to evacuate Babangida and his family from the building that was under siege. When Babangida was taken to a safe location outside the barracks, UK Bello returned to the barracks with intent to fight back and displace the coup plotters. Unfortunately for him, he was shot and killed on his return to the barracks. The coup was, however, frustrated by loyal troops led by Lieutenant General Sani Abacha, who was Babangida's right-hand man of all times. This was the 7th military coup in Nigeria's history. Babangida then returned to the barracks and assumed the seat of power. Gideon Oka was arrested and tried in military court-martial alongside others, and in the end, he was executed by firing squad along with 41 other military personnel that were implicated in the coup. Babangida stayed on for another 3 years and finally stepped aside from power in August 26, 1993. He handed over power to an interim government headed by Ernest Shenekon, a civilian and boardroom guru. Ernest Shenekon was to take charge of the country for a short period of time and see to the conduct of democratic elections into the elective offices in the country. Barely 83 days into his government, General Sani Abacha removed him in yet another military coup. This was Nigeria's 8th military coup in barely 33 years of Nigeria's independence from Britain. Abacha was the most senior military officer in Nigeria at the time, and he simply walked into Shenekon's office in Aso Rock in the company of Lieutenant General Oladipo Diya, then Chief of Defense Staff, and Lieutenant General Aliyu Mohammed, then Chief of Army Staff. They went into the villa to have a discussion with Shenekon and ordered him to resign. They must have also told him the consequences of refusal to resign. Waiting outside for them were truckloads of fully armed soldiers. Colonel Lawan Gwadebe, the commandant of the National Guard, and Brigadier General Bashir Magaji, commander of the Brigade of Guards, were stationed by Abacha to keep watch over the troops outside and command them as appropriate. Abacha had obviously given them a script to act on, and they were not expected to deviate from it. Shenekon was a gentleman who found himself in the command circle of well-trained military officers whose proclivity for violence at the time could not be predicted. He accepted the orders of the military and resigned to give way to Abacha and his men. A coup had just occurred and the coup was successfully executed. Abacha took over, and in the national broadcast made in the evening of the said day, he announced himself to the world as the new military head of state of Nigeria. He was in power from August 1993 to June 8, 1998, when he passed on in his sleep in Aso Rock Villa. He was succeeded by General Abdul Salami Abubakar, who only stayed in office for 1 year and saw to the conduct of democratic elections and transition of power to a civilian president in the person of Olusegun Obasanjo in May 1999. Since May 1999 till date, Nigeria has enjoyed an unbroken period of civilian rule with successful handover of power from one democratically elected administration to another. Nigeria's history is indeed a checkered history, and Nigeria remains one of the few countries in Africa where military rule had taken the center stage for many years. Within 33 years of its existence as an independent nation, Nigeria witnessed 8 military coups, with some being extremely bloody, with scores of lives lost in the process. Thanks for watching this edition of Back in History, and do remember to subscribe to the channel or follow the page for regular notification on every new video. I remain your friend and host Ekemini Udim, thanking you for sparing your precious time to keep me company on this mission for the documentation of the history of Africa in contemporary digital forms.